to the Innerverse. It's an illusion.
Welcome to the One Within All to the Innerverse podcast. I'm your host, Chance, and once again, dear listener, we are united in our quest to delve into the deepest of mysteries, surpass the veil of the physical senses, and fearlessly explore for the lost gnosis written upon the occult recesses of our soul. Throughout the ages, the path of the wisdom seeker has taken many names, but common to most every authentic initiatory journey is the realization and integration of the laws and principles known throughout the ages as Hermeticism. And despite the apparent ease of access to information granted by our technological internet age, the majority of insights gained from investigations into the planes of reality that ours is sandwiched within have been kept secret from the profane through defensive esotericism in alchemical writing and a frequently strict adherence to an oral transmission of the hard-won secrets of the astral realms. But despite the hidden nature of Hermeticism, one man in particular has earned a unique level of fame for his eccentric magical lifestyle and infamy for his involvement in what was called the Trial of the Magus, which took place in Italy during the rise to power of fascism in the 20th century. His name and title in the human world was the Baron Richardo Ricciardelli, but his lesser-known nomen, and perhaps the true name of his daimon itself, was known in his writings as Marco Daffi. And in this episode, we have a rare opportunity to take a glimpse past the veil into his magical writings, personal correspondences, and polarizing biography, thanks to the diligent work of author and translator David Pantano, whose book Alchemical Hermeticism explores the life and times of the Baron Richardelli in a depth never before made available to English speakers. As David says in his book, Daffi's writings are symbolic of an internal journey along the hero's path of self-realization to uncover and ultimately transfigure the deeper strata of selfhood. Well, my friends, if you've been with me on this podcast for any length of time, you surely can't miss the singular significance contained within this unique luminary's search for self-realization as being 100% the same mission as of this show. And I'm absolutely stoked to get into this conversation. So check the description below wherever you're listening for links to David's book and all the ways you can support Innerverse. Thanks again to all the generous patrons who make it all possible. And let's do this thing. Everyone, join me with their warmest psychic reception to the Hermetic historian, Thothian of Toronto, and unlocker of the magic door, David Pantano. Welcome to Innerverse, and thanks for joining me today, man.
It's great to be here, Chance. I'm looking forward to very interesting and engaging discussion, and peace and love to all the viewers and listeners who will be tuning into this podcast.
Yes, indeed, my friend. So I thought, the book does it the other direction, but I thought it might be interesting to begin more with the biographical elements of the book, maybe as an introduction. Who was the Baron Richardo Ricciardelli, and what piqued your interest in him? I know you've already got a book about his mentor that came before this, so it semes you've been on the trail of Italian Hermeticists for a while.
Yeah, let's set the context. So Baron Richardelli, his birth dates. He was born in 1900, died in 1969, so relatively contemporary. In Naples, in Italy, he came from a very rich family of landowners that owned property in Rome and all throughout central and South Italy. And I guess he, as the oldest born of a scion of wealth and prestige, there were great expectations for the Baron, for Ricciardelli to achieve heights that his family had expected upon him. And he had a number of went to university, had obtained a number of university degrees, but his real interest in life was in esotericism, and specifically Hermeticism. He was known to be a loner, someone who was shy and had particularly difficulties dealing with the opposite sex. Ricciardelli, as was common in that era and around the 1920s, was set up in an arranged marriage with a baroness, another from the Roman nobility, and their marriage started off with difficulties, that the Baron had difficulty consummating the relationship, and it led to much more systemic issues in terms of him being able to express themselves or assert themselves in the broader domain of love and emotions, not like a lot of men have even in these days. So Ricciardelli sought out a doctor who specialized in these type of issues, and this doctor happened to be a Hermeticist himself, who was the leader of one of the academies of the therapeutic magical fraternity of Miriam, which was the leading esoteric Hermetic chain in Italy of its time, similar to what in English-speaking world we would associate with the Golden Dawn. And so this doctor, who's both a clinical doctor but also someone who, as I mentioned earlier, was a leader, was the head of the Roman-based chapter of the Miriam, introduced Ricciardelli to what would become Ricciardelli's mentor in the esoteric arts, Giuliano Kremerz. Now, Giuliano Kremerz is sort of like the leading Hermeticist, magus of Italy of that time, and recognized not only as a good writer, theorist, doctrinaire, but also renowned for his practice, for his extraordinary abilities, specifically in the areas of Hermetic healing, of long distance healing. And so this meeting was set up between Ricciardelli and Kremerz, and through the relationship, the contact, Kremerz was able to diagnose Ricciardelli his problems with his wife and with expressing or actualizing his emotional self, which in the Kremerzian constitution of humans, there are four bodies that are integrated, interrelated. There's the physical body called the Saturnian or Saturn. There's the lunar body or the emotional body. There's the mercurial body or the intellectual. And then there's the solar body, which is your archetypal or divine self. So through Kremerz's advanced abilities to diagnose issues and causes of symptomatic issues and restriction, he was able to determine that Ricciardelli had a karmic defect, a retribution, a deficiency that was deeply ingrained in his psyche, that there was no physical or remedial aspect that could resolve that he had to undergo some deeper psychurgic type of trials to be able to identify what the source of that karmic retribution is, and from there to determine what the potential solutions would be. So that set up the relationship between between Baron Richardelli and Giuliano Kremerz. So after Kremerz, this is in the late 1920s, in the 1930s, Kremerz died, and then Ricciardelli continued these practices, or these psychurgic practices, to do some past life regression, to be able to go into itself, to enter into altered states of consciousness, and to be able to separate his historical personality, is the conditioning that he's added to himself as a result of family, society, as a result of work and so forth, from his innate self, from his innate person. He was able, by doing these type of past life regressions, or what the proper term is called anamesis, which is a term that was used by the ancient Pythagoreans and Plato to actually go inside yourself to discover your archetypal self, the self that is the root of who you are, and the historical self being just one incarnation of that archetypal self. So Ricciardelli was able to do these practices, and then he realized that his name in a previous life was as a Libyan physician called Marco Daffi, which was translated or converted into Italian to be Marco Daffi. And this Marco Daffi had committed a grave crime, a transgression in a previous existence, where as a physician to one of the pharaohs, he had an illicit affair with in some instances they say it was either the wife of the pharaoh or of the daughter. And this led to a curse. This led to a inhibition that was enucleated or ensouled in Ricciardelli throughout his various incarnations. And so this work of past life regression, of being able to enter into altered state of consciousness, to be able to traverse astral portals, and to come up with images or visualizations, dreamlike seances, where his past life came to fore, proved to be the nexus, the albatross that was over Ricciardelli's shoulder that he had to resolve if he wanted to liberate himself of this curse and to evolve into the person that he was meant to be, as a noble, as a baron, as someone of prestige. And with that, there came a number of different conditions, which I won't go into. That's all covered in the book. But that sets the premise of it. So the ability for Marco Daffi or Ricciardelli to be able to do these type of excursions into astral provided him with some very deep insights, a gnosis, if you like, into the workings of alchemy, which or alchemical hermeticism, which is the transformation of lead, the historic self, the self that's tied to the human animal world, to that of the solar world, the divine self. And so that those processes, those teachings, those techniques are articulated in the book that I've just written, called Alchemical Hermeticism: The Secret Teachings of Marco Daffi on Initiation. Yeah, by Inner Traditions, and it's just out as of yesterday.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that we're hitting it so close to the release date. Very cool. Awesome. So yeah, the initiatory.
You got the scoop on this, Chance.
Thanks, Inner Traditions. I got a good contact over there. The the initiatory parts of the book are really juicy, and I definitely want to get to those. But as we're still setting a little bit of the groundwork for who this figure was, and even on his mentor's words that he had a bit of psychological instability, I can't help but notice the pattern in people who are reincarnationists or who explore past lives, that it seems to be a solid 80% of them have some sort of past life as a priest or temple priestess in Egypt. It's almost a cliche at this point, and you have to wonder about how much of that is belief affecting a person versus how much of that is reality. And what's not something that we can discern, but considering, as you put it, it was an albatross around his neck, and that belief in his past transgression was part of what reinforced his actions leading to the eventual loss of a bunch of his fortune in this famous trial of the Magus. What do you think about his lifelong quest for anamesis? Do you think that he achieved it, or was somewhat deluded, or some of both?
I don't think it's delusion. So I know I did a lot of research with those who had direct contact with Daffi, who met with him at dinner, who had him over for Christmas.
I'll point out one of the passages of people that are talking about him postmortem. Daffi actually gave him a sort of a rundown of past existences, and the guy expressed relief that he didn't have any Egyptian priest incarnations.
Exactly.
Which I thought was funny.
So, and you have to think and I write about this in the introduction. These visions, these what we call sacred representations, are archetypes that are manifesting themselves in your vision. So they take on universal forms. So it's not so much, and when you talk about is it real or not, what is reality? You know, the three-dimensional images that pop in front of us on the TV, on the computer, on looking out our window. Are they any more real than the dream images we have? Or it's all what your inner world projects outwards. So they take on universal symbols, and that's how they should be represented. So if Daffi represented himself as a scribe or as an erudite, a doctor in the past, those are symbolic of someone who had those kind of qualities and attributes. It doesn't necessarily have to fit into any type of historical context. That's what your subconscious is projecting outwards. And that's what
that makes total sense. I mean, what's the difference between an experience in the dream world or the real world when experience is the only thing that we have, or consciousness is the only thing that exists?
I mean, you may in a future incarnation dream about yourself as being a podcaster, and yet it reflects something that back in the past you could have been a town crier. You could have been, a communicator. I mean, those are all qualities of Mercury as a god of commerce, is that they have ability to communicate in between dimensions. So it's all symbolic. It's, if you're familiar with the Jungian perspective, it's all these type of in-depth, innate imagery that are projecting itself into the surface, and then your conscious mind uses the tools that are available to it now. So you take these pristine images that come from a deep part of yourself that haven't been exposed before, and they project into your conscious mind. Your conscious mind uses those tools, those images that it has available in this present time to make sense of it, to organize it. So it already, you take something that's of a nuministic essence, and you've put relativity onto it. So it's bound to repeat itself into familiar patterns, because that's what we're familiar in this time, and when we're trying to make sense of those imageries. But so what a good occultist will do is try to look at those universal imagery and root it into a context that makes sense with the individual, rather than to question the historical veracity, because that's a never-ending circle.
No, that makes a lot of sense, actually, that especially considering the circles that the Baron was a part of, calling themselves basically like therapeutics in the Order of Miriam and all that, it definitely evokes the ancient College of Alexandria and the therapeutes of a previous age in Egypt, or also known as the eclectics, which means they're so interested in all that. I wanted to ask about, but
again, the universal symbol is that an individual has a proclivity to heal, to help others in their development for integration. That's sort of like, so the bourgeois would want to put a title to it, want to put a profession, a status, but that's not in the deeper archetypal world have a lot of meaning, a lot of bearing. It's sort of like, what are those virtues, those qualities that come to the surface? And whatever form they take is based on the historical, societal environment that's currently taking place. But when you want to extract those symbols, those results into what are the common themes, then you want to elevate that logos to a more universal meaning, if that kind of addresses it. So it's not a question that he actually in a previous life was a physician to the pharaoh. It's sort of like he had a high standing in a previous, in his psyche, he had a high standing, and he was in a world of people who were of a similar ilk, and there was a transgression. So that how that dramaturgy presents itself in his incarnational dream work and his visualization is as a doctor was working with at a pharaoh's court who had a illicit relationship with a family member.
And that's something that would be kind of at the forefront of symbolism in his mind, considering the circles he ran with. And I find it fascinating too. You know, I've done a lot of study on sort of the historical chain of custody of these traditions and how what we would call like the ecclesiastical system of rulership predates Christianity, and that Christianity or the Catholic Church more or less rebranded an existing system that had somewhat of a universality in terms of mystery traditions and made public a lot of otherwise private ceremonies and things like the Eucharist. Even the father of church history, as he's known, Eusebius, he wrote that the ancient therapeutae of Egypt or Alexandria were Christians, and that their ancient writings were the Gospels and epistles. And why I'm bringing this up is because I find it interesting that these highfalutin, noblemen of Italy and France are involved in these exact same occult initiatory practices that the priesthoods in charge of the ecclesiastical system in an age prior to Christianity that made up the sort of religio-governmental hierarchies of ages before our history has much record of, that they're following kind of the same practices. And they're also the ones that you consider, like you said, the bourgeoisie or the ruling class of society. Do you have any commentary to make on, the relationship between nobility or aristocracy and the ruling class with these kind of occult traditions and societies?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. First time I've been asked that. I think it all relates back to deep in our psyche, in the Western psyche, how we structure reality based on a tripartite structure to reality, where you have a royalty, you have a sacerdotal, and then you have the working class, and then later on came the merchant class. So back in since the origins of Western society, those tripartite or quadripartite division of society really reflects where you would be in the order of things. It was very regimented and very structured and hierarchical. So it's quite natural that those structures at a subconscious or unconscious level are passed on from generation to generation, and they resurface, but just in modern language. So, the royalty today could be the Elon Musk and the Jeff Bezos and Zuckerberg and all those dudes. And, the sacerdotes are the intellectuals. I don't know. Who do you pick for your intellectuals for today, in these worlds?
I think they're the real intellectuals are not so well represented in the mass media, but I do find it fascinating the constant question and oscillation I have between, the the assumption that the putting forth of very specific occult symbolism in mass media events constituting some kind of secret ritual to influence the collective consciousness versus the emergence of those symbols naturally in events that are witnessed by the collective consciousness. The first thing that comes to mind is this like helicopter plane crash, where I haven't really looked into it, but I saw the first article and only that I looked at, like in the first paragraph, it says it was runway 33. And you notice this constantly in these sort of mass tragedy shootings, things like that, where there's always just like a big 33 plastered somewhere at the front and center of the article. And, I think it's a little of A and a little of B, the emergence of these symbols naturally and the intentional peppering of them. But there does seem to be, whenever you take the Hermetic axiom on board that the universe is purely mental, that regardless of, you can just sort of discard the supposed intent of somebody that you don't know and will never meet and consider, well, what is this telling me about the universe? What pattern does this represent? How does the consistency of these symbols help inform me about truth? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, Jung has done some great work on that in his theories of synchronicity, that nothing happens by accident, that like attracts like, and even at an unconscious level, if you're seeing signs of 33 popping out in media, that's great. I think a lot of people are seeing 666 though.
Right, which is, on one level to the masses, that's obviously supposed to be an evil, devilish number. But if you go just a little further into your own self-initiation, it's the magic square of the sun. It's a solar number. It's a Jesus number. And there's I think a lot of this stuff, alchemy included, and I think your book is kind of an example of that with the siren plastered right on the front, that there are particular symbols that are boogeymen or gatekeepers to the wisdom, like the Baphomet, for example, and the 666, that are guardian of the threshold, manifests in more places than just in the astral plane as we try to transcend to a different level of consciousness, but also puts itself in symbols in front of particularly juicy nuggets of insight and realization. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm not one who gets so wrapped up or have a huge reaction when one perceives these type of symbols. Symbols, by their very nature, have a semiotic component. In other words, they don't have much value in them themselves, but they point to meanings, to significance elsewhere. And those symbols and meanings, you have control over in terms of how you react to them and what importance and value that you provide to them. So someone who's done work in consciousness and realized that you can't have light without having darkness and vice versa, that, all these things are all make for a better soup as far as I'm concerned. They're all important ingredients. So some of it is just random, some of it's intentional, some is it's just bad marketing, but it all adds up into the state of where we're at in the collective sphere, that if we're putting more attention on a lower vibrational medium than those that are higher. And that in itself is a telling story.
I definitely agree with that. I mean, it's everything has a light and a dark aspect to it. When people want to say, oh, it's all the Masons are evil. Well, any organization has good and bad elements. Every human being has good and bad elements. There's no pure black or white with people or collectives. But speaking of groups, I want to talk about the therapeutic aspect again, more on the results level, and maybe starting with, as someone who's done a lot of research into Daffi's mentor, Kremers, why does Daffi call him a miracle worker?
Well, because there are documented records of Kremers taking on patients or infirmed individuals who conventional medicine had given up on, saying, you've got X amount of months to live. And then through that interaction with Kremertz, that they've gone on to live many more years than what was predicted, or that their illness went into remission. So there is concrete evidence of Kremertz applying some of these theurgical therapeutic practices that resulted in infirmities even going remission or being cleared up, or the patient having a period of dying with dignity and with relative ease and peace of mind.
And I certainly don't doubt the reality of that as a possibility, as someone who does a form of long range energy healing with a lot of success and a whole folder full of positive testimonials and concrete results. So I'm curious though, because what I do, apart from a little incorporation with tarot as a interpretive method, there's not a lot esoteric per se about the method. And I'm wondering, theurgy, this is like a divine invocation, right? That's what this word means.
Yeah. I wouldn't use it. It's Hermetic Medicism. There's a wide range of different type of applications, theurgical being one, but it's also valorization of herbal medicine, of herbal instruments and tools as well. So that's where aspects of natural substances are infused with energy, and that has a greater responsiveness with the patient than to use just purely energy transference. So I don't want to misinterpret or misguide the viewer in thinking there's only one type of method in terms of Hermetic medicine. There are many types, and theurgy is just one of them.
Well, can we explore some of those types? I'm always
Sure.
curious what else, I think there's more than one way to achieve the same end, which is mind-body healing.
Yeah. And Kremertz, so Kremertz had a degree as a naturopathic doctor. And so he wasn't one that said it's either, energy healing or conventional medicine. He was saying that, depending on the individual, depending on the illness, depending on a lot of circumstances, that, the ends, to your point, Chance, the ends justify the means. So he did not exclusively, in all cases, prefer one type of therapeutic intervention over another. He preferred a harmonization based on the individual circumstances. So what that means is that using his ability, his exegetal capabilities to understand the deep or the root causes of the illness and not just of the symptoms. So would involve some of this karmic work that we talked about earlier, is to understand what is the source behind the manifestation of those symptoms of illness. And it could be things such as repression. It could be things such as ancestral legacies that are passing on from one generation to the other. It could be a number of different factors, and it could be different hierarchies in terms of how the weight of each of those factors are resulting in the illness. So part of the therapy involved a very thorough diagnosis. And from there, Kremertz would determine the best methods and the best solutions to address those issues. So the reason why I'm saying that is that typically wasn't one diagnosis of an illness and and a therapy, it was very multi-layered in that to reach to the core, to reach to the root, you need to address the surface symptoms. So and each of those different layers or dimensions potentially could require different therapies.
Yeah, that makes sense. You want to, there's one thing about having a method or a technique, but then there's also the question of the person in front of you and what they need and how that might deviate and require some creativity on the part of the practitioner to address the individual in front of them. I am thinking of a recent client as a great example of how this mind-body healing stuff works, where this person was experiencing a host of symptoms, but the most egregious one was a thyroid shutdown. And what we uncovered through our work, more in a mantic sense, as the methodology that I practice allows for, that a traumatic experience in childhood that was repressed intentionally by the parents telling this client not to tell anyone what had happened to them. And then that implanted an expectation about life that when like the help was needed to be expressed, it would be met with resistance or withdrawal of help. And repetition of this over and over again eventually led to a throat chakra energetic blockage to the level of a thyroid shutdown. And I'm, grossly oversimplifying for the sake of condensing it.
No, that's a great example. And the throat chakra being the that vortex of communication, the patient you described who suppressed that from not being able to talk to it could have led to that concentration of that deficiency, of the imbalance occurring in that thyroid area. So that's actually a great. May I ask, what type of therapeutic practice do you work in?
So it's called biofield tuning. Although I will admit I'm not a certified or trained practitioner, I found out about this method and investigated it myself and found that it was completely real, and I was able to teach myself it. But essentially, we use tuning forks to sweep through the energy field, the 6-foot space around the body in all directions. And the amazing thing about this modality was that the innovator of it discovered an anatomy to the human energy field, that energy stuck at different dimensions of it, left, right, up, down, forward, or back, had specific general meanings applicable to any person with differences for the unique individual. But, the right side of the throat chakra is more about being interrupted or not heard when you speak, whereas the left side of the throat chakra is more about being unable to speak or afraid to say it in general. So, those are the generalizations, but this method also gives you the timestamp on when something occurred to somebody, similar to the rings of a tree. The distance away from the body that the stuck energy is constitutes how old they were. Say 3 feet away for a 30-year-old would be about the age of 15, like halfway through the field, halfway through the life.
Well, my colleague who wrote the foreword, Valerio Tomasini, he's a naturopath in Rome, and he works a lot with bioresonance. And he said he's had some great success treating patients with all kinds of nerve issues, all kinds of infections, COVID, etc. And he's seen how you said with the tuning fork, how various frequencies, the reaction, the intervention of that energy, how it can have drastic change into the trigger a patient from who's in the, going through a lot of pain and a lot of their vitality being sapped out. They can see tangibly the difference in terms of vitality being restored and the pathogens itself dying, being zapped out by this introduction of this bioresonance energy. So he's saying it's really cool. It's wonder working. He's seen it with his own eyes.
It is. It's really, there's almost limitless applications, and a lot of people's physical infirmities are in some way related to a visceral hypersensitivity brought about by nervous system overload. Like fight or flight is how you would describe the presentation of that But in terms of the electrical body, it's an overcharge of electricity or negative energy in the nervous system that has nowhere to go because the person has blocked all of their channels. And the sound can help just allow that to
do you
pass
charge for this, or?
Yeah, I have. I mean, you gotta.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think it's valuable.
I have somebody who may be interested. Maybe we'll talk after the show.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's really something. I mean, I've even got a recent person who came to me for all things, a picky eating problem throughout life, like an inability to eat different foods beyond what they're comfortable with. And just got another follow-up email from this person. They told me about how their digestion changed for a week and their stomach did a lot of rearranging. And now they have an aversion to the unhealthy foods and an attraction to new foods that they would have never tried before, demonstrating the pleomorphism of our gut biome even to change through resonance, that the bacteria in our stomach and digestive tract can change based on the quality and energetic consistency of our thoughts and our emotions, which is wild because, you hear from conventional that you need to flush your biome and then take probiotics, and none of that is actually strictly necessary.
Yeah. I mean, there are all kinds of circuits between the neural pathways of the brain that run through the central and the peripheral nervous systems. And a lot of times they can't be changed. The individual doesn't have the wherewithal to change those patterns. So the point I'm trying to make, a lot of people who've gone through a trauma or had an injury, and physically the injury may have healed up, but mentally it's still going on. So they're sending pain signals through their neural circuit way to the area that was afflicted, as a post-trauma syndrome that they can't get rid of. So yeah, I mean, if we could talk about this later, if we could maybe have a conversation after the podcast on.
Sure.
I'd be
Yeah.
Curious to find out how it could help a family member, actually.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And what you're saying is so true. Even acupuncture you can use needles in the place of an amputated arm to energetically discharge the phantom limb.
The phantom limb. Yeah.
The possibilities are amazing. But, speaking of this, I wonder what your take is on why Daffi or, the Baron Richardelli was unable to heal his virility problems, despite having all of these quite advanced and esoteric therapeutic techniques available to him through the various circles that he ran in.
Well, it's not to say he didn't. It's just said that in the 20s, when he was in his 20s, he didn't have the tools or the knowledge how to do that. And that's why he established such a highly charged and intense relationship with Kremertz, who showed him the tools how to. So his issues with affection, with incontinence and so forth, had a much more deeper, as I mentioned earlier, karmic cause than anything that was physical or anything that had to do with the psychological. So the techniques to actually go and redress those karmic inhibitions was much more in-depth than what typical esoteric or psychological practices of the day could provide him with. And I think through my research from testimonies of those who knew him very well, that he was actually, in fact, able to address those later in his life. But to reach that point, he went through a lot of different trials and tribulations, as I've documented in my book. So yeah, when he first reached out to Kremertz, he didn't have the tools. And then after Kremertz taught him these techniques to go into these anamesis or these past life regressions, he was able to undertake these incursions, to have these visualizations where the events that led to this enucleating or ensouling of this curse or of this inhibition in him He understood what had happened. And from that, he was able to devise with other adepts, master esoterists, what the corresponding virtues that he needs to be able to develop to be able to nullify the effects of the vices of that karmic impediments that was enucleated in the deeper layers of the soul.
I really liked the indications somewhere I read in the book relating humility and moral virtue as requirements for the healing arts for natural magic. And I wonder if we could expand on the relationship between virtue and the ability to act virtually. You know what I mean? Like,
and we say virtually, chance in the Hermetic sense is not so much in the moral sense. It's not, you show virtue by, dressing appropriately. It's not that kind of virtue. So virtue comes from the ancient Latin word vir, which is an ancient Indo-European meaning for like a hero, for a true man. In ancient yogic texts, they talk about the viryasana, the hero's pose. It has to do with the individual who's ascended in their evolution to a state of a hero that is one step above of humanity, one step below the gods. So using that reference point as a starting, the virtue is someone who has an active soul, not passive soul, the soul that's always reacting, that's always being attacked, but a soul that is integral, has an Adamic root to it, and that it's developed in the Hermetic sense, these 7 virtues associated with the 7 illuminating lights, universal energies of love, of knowledge, of courage, of wisdom, of depth, or Saturnian. And so these flames of initiation, these virtues need to be integrated as part of to arrive to this level of a virtualist, of a vir. So the Hermeticist needs to be able to rise above the human condition by a process of purgation, of purifying themselves of those elements that tie them down to the purely mundane level of the world. So the monkey mind, you hear those who, are easily distracted because of all the chaos that goes on inside their mind and outside of the mind. The Hermeticists or the virtuous need to be able to separate themselves from that. They need to go inside themselves and purge themselves to separate the dross from what's fine in terms of energy, to arrive at a level of being, a level of essence that isn't affected by those. And once you're able to reach that essence, you're able to integrate that in your 4 bodies, then you can project out virtues or those energies, either at an emotional level, intellectual level, at a physical level, or in a solar level, which is at the astral level. You're able to communicate your presence, there's a fragrance, there's a way that you communicate through astral channels, in other dreams and in visualizations. There's other ways that you're able to project this subtle energy. So that's the one of the reasons for why the Hermeticist needs to practice virtue, is to be able to arrive at a level of being that's higher than what the typical human is, to separate their human animal from their angelic component. And at that angelic level, which is typified by the archetype of the Miriam, of the Mary. Mary is being that repository that gave birth to the divine child, to the Christ. Well, the Hermeticist needs to be able to reach that level of purity, of purgation, to be able to give birth to these types of prodigious acts.
I also find it's fascinating how, in one of many examples, the way that modern technology is almost a plagiarism of occultism or natural human psychic tendencies, that we use the word virtual now to describe almost like a pseudo embodiment of the avatar. You go into virtual reality and you in a video game and you embody this hero, but without actually taking on the ver of your empirical self and your true heroic essence. And interestingly, once you do have these virtues, you say, or someone says in the book, I don't always have it indicated who says what, but from the same exercise and of powers and of the will directed toward a beneficial therapeutical end sprang the development of psychic powers in the practitioners, meaning that in a sense, these psychic powers, as you describe, astral travel, communication in dreams, etc., are like the natural virtual reality in a way, but virtual not as in fake, but virtual as in the heroic.
Yeah. Yeah. There's author Douglas Hofstadter who wrote The Mind's Eye, Gödel, Eisel, and Bach. And he talks about the similar things, but 30 years ago, even more, about all these like virtual imageries and representations that they're all created artificially and on computers and other means of emissions. But what they're lacking is the eye, that Newman, the solar aspect. They are just fleeting images. And the problem for a lot of us is that it's the lesson of narcissists is that we can't differentiate these golems, these images without a soul versus those souls who don't have an image, who don't have a presence. And we're taking more value and we're more affected by these golems, these ghouls, than we are those who actually are ensouled. And that has consequences as well in terms of our relationship with reality.
I sometimes consider the possibility that what we experience in our physical, mundane reality as technology, like our capacity to communicate face to face, but across countries in real time, could potentially be almost like a narrative that our consciousness imposes upon what allows us to accept an innate psychic capacity that has just been latent in humanity and is now awakening in a sort of bubbling up and uncontrollable way, as if what's really happening when you consider the mental nature of all existence, that we're having a mind-to-mind interface right now, but our capacity to accept that has to come through the narrative of technology. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's probably a correlation. If I understand what you're going with this, Chance, between a negative correlation between the increase of technology in our consciousness, which atrophies our psychic abilities, our connection, our ability at a hyper level to osmosify between individuals, to connect, to be able to connect in each of the four bodies. That's becoming atrophied as people are entering into this virtual reality. So with that, we're losing our ability, just like in human evolution or devolution, where we lost our tail. The evolution, we just have the tailbone is that stump. That our psychic abilities or psychic powers or abilities of intuition are waning or are becoming distorted through just all the bombardment of media noise, but also just like this tunnel vision that a lot of individuals have through their addiction to technology and the media of technology.
I wonder about the role of commerce and corporation in that atrophying. Granted that if this is a psychic ability that has now just been wedged with a middleman that can skim our energy out of us off the top of this interaction, that kind of explains all of the various folk knowledges that have been sold to corporations or I shouldn't say sold to corporations, but replaced by corporations in lessened in their efficacy too. I mean, basically
Well,
everything
yeah,
that we receive from conveniences is a repackaged and lesser version of something that, in a folk sense, humanity used to retain and transmit as a knowledge and skill set. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, corporations are smart. They are aggressive. They are hawks. They are the magical practitioners. They've taken these lessons of how to control minds and how to control behavior, these magical teachings, and applied it. That's why we have marketing gurus. That's why we have marketing research. You know, corporations know, advertisers know, to be able to sell you a product, they need to get your attention first. So there's all kinds of models that they have in the marketing world, like simple one being the ADA model, is that you need to attract attention and build awareness. And that from awareness, you need to incur interest. And from interest, you need to incur desire to purchase. And then the final stage is you need to have someone go in and close a deal, and there's action. So it follows like this reverse pyramid, where the more it trickles down, the more broader of awareness you have, the greater chance you can convert those who are aware of your product to those who are interested, to those who desire, to finally those who purchase it. And then there's a whole after purchasing a behavioral model as well. But the point is, the marketers, the corporations, they are the magus of these eras, because they're using these principles in a very scientific and a very intense way, and it's sort of like you were saying, that a lot of the knowledge has been incorporated into the corporate world and has been relabeled into something else. But it's similar type of mechanisms, of magical mechanisms that Paracelsus wrote about, or Ficino wrote about, or Giordano Bruno. You go back to Age of Time. It's all about understanding individuals in those four different bodies, or those energetic frequencies. And in the end, magic comes down to the ability to manage sympathies and antipathies. Sympathies to draw things towards you, antipathies is to avoid the things you don't want. So it's the same type of mechanism. It's taking something very complex and priming it down to its elements, so you have a system in place that you can activate. Like when you go fishing, is that you know, according to the time of day and the lake, where you're going to find the fish and what bait you need to reel them in. Those are kind of some of those basic principles that are operating in the corporate world, or operating in the media behind some of the tools that we all are tuned into these days, like the internet, like television, movies, et cetera, et cetera.
I found out while researching what would be considered the best practices in the industry for attention grabbing video titles, that the golden rule is to incorporate something related to one of the 7 deadly sins into your title as the strongest attractor. It's like, this is literally the inversion of this idea of the virtues. It's pretty wild. But, with magic, I also think it's lost on the majority just how impactful it is that the mega corporations and influencers of the world are psychological sorcerers, because in the law of mentalism, it would entail that the deepest occult knowledge would be the true knowledge of psychology, because that psychology in the microcosm of the human would be applicable to the macrocosm of the universe. And that if you knew how to pull the levers on the micro, that's exactly how you change the reality in the macro.
Yeah, and on that connection between the micro and the macro, Kremertz wrote about, after the First World War, this psychic cloud that was released with all the suffering and the deaths that occurred, the millions that died, that in itself would impact future generations. And we saw, after the 1418 war, the rise of fascism and communism in the late 20s and 30s. And then we saw, another interesting psychic cloud or collective psychic cloud that occurred after the Second World War in the 60s, when people started saying, to hell with this Eisenhower way vision of life, where you have to wear a suit and tie and live in a nuclear family. We're going to go out and go on the road. We're going to live our lives. So the connection between the micro and the macro world is there, but it's just not, people don't have the eyes to see it. It's visible, but it's invisible at the same time. And that's where fellows like yourself and myself are able to bridge that gap between what's actually going on versus what people think is actually happening.
Oh yeah. I got to ask one more question if you got time for it, because you're talking about the not trusting people that claim to know and style themselves as magus or shaman and et cetera, intrinsically being skeptical, which I think is wise. And you make when we're talking about this exploration of one's monad and individuation, we're talking about our unique expression as a being, which I think it fits hand in glove to the concept that's elucidated in the book, that Hermeticism is not so much about finding a repeatable process as much as it is about exploring the anomalous and the outlier experiences that are invocable through exploration. You see the connection here.
Yeah. So, what separates the magus from the actual individual is it's not that they don't live in day-to-day life. They do, but they're also open to that extraordinary, to the anomalous, to to realities and truth that appear, that are experienced at the thresholds of consciousness that the normal individual doesn't typically experience. So how do you reach that stage? Is that you do the work that's written about in the book. And how do you know, like, whether a magus, an initiate, an integral individual is what they say or what they appear to be versus a fraud? Is that there's these subtle, once you're able to have enough, when you've done enough work, enough purification, your ability to sense subtle qualities, that third eye opens up. And you can perceive someone by their energy, by the tonality, by the fragrance that they have, by the impression that they leave with you. Those are all subtle signs that this energy, this vibe, you're connecting with. Someone who's a big talker, fast talker, has a way with words and so forth, they don't have those subtle qualities. I'd be very wary that they may be really good marketers or very good on the appearance on the outside, but if they don't connect with you on the inside, then that's a telling sign as well.
That's where aesthetics comes into philosophy, that your innate sense of beauty and the perception of that or lack thereof is one of the most important compasses that you can ever hold in your life, whether dealing with people or choosing any other type of direction. Absolutely.
For sure.
Do you have any outlier experiences you want to share with us, though? While
no, I don't think so. Those things that has a time and place, and I don't think it's. In my next book, I talk about a trip I did with ayahuasca. So we can read about that. The part of the things that when you have these outlier extraordinary experiences, you want to affirm and recognize them for that. And you don't want to profane them by, in a coffee conversation. At the right time and place, you hold them. Maybe sacred is too strong of a word, but you hold it with reverence that you were able to experience that, and you hold it in reverence and you treat it with respect. So that I prefer to be discreet with that, if you don't mind, Chance.
Not at all. I mean, it makes perfect sense that just by allowing others to open up their interpretation to something deeply personal it depotentiates it. You know what I mean? Like it can reduce.
Yeah, no, and there is a time for place with that, but I don't. If that's something for another conversation, then we can explore that. But I think what I wanted to focus on this podcast is on the new book. Is to introduce the audience to these high level adepts and initiates, Marco Daffi and Juliana Kremritz, and hopefully we were able to share some of that light with the audience.
Absolutely. And I enjoyed the book. I'm definitely going to be watching out for the Hermetic Book of the Dead. Thanks for your time today, David. And maybe we can converse again sometime.
For sure. I appreciate it. Thanks very much.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
All right, my good people. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I know I did. In fact, I talked to David almost a month ago at the time of me sitting down to do this outro, you know, in my quest for quality over quantity. The pace of putting stuff out is also slower. That might have to do with, you know, dad duties a little bit as well. But a lot of the ideas we talked about with David have been percolating in my mind the entire time since we talked. I think his book is really valuable for the examination of a magical life, you could call it. The Baron definitely had a colorful set of experiences. You know, and this is not a knock on David's work at all or the book in general. But when I find writings from these sorts of people, not David, but the Baron, you know, whether it's in the 20th century or the 12th century, it's also impenetrable in a way. You know, it's almost like word salad or jargon. And I get that the entire magical philosophic world is defended by very thick barriers of esotericism. So maybe someone else out there, one of you reading the book, will comprehend the terms of art in a way that didn't quite click for me. But at the end of the day, I look at these individuals' lives as a better guiding principle to the value of their work than, you know, the work itself, especially if it's something that I'm going to have to do a lot of penetrating to comprehend. And I just don't think that the Baron's life was one that I would have wanted to live, even being born into the lap of luxury as he was, although that's definitely no indicator of whether or not someone's life is going to go well. It's really this question of past lives that this conversation really gave me a new perspective on. But I'll get to that. Let's talk about what was in the Plus extension first, because the Plus extension had some really fascinating threads that we weaved. And we started out talking about the Hermetic understanding of the source, you know, of the monad, the pure origin of all things, and how the source is really more a set of laws or a first principle that acts or is perceivable by us as laws. Then we talked about Hermetic ontology, the creationist aspect of Hermeticism, as opposed to the emanationist style of most spiritual traditions or mythologies. Then we had a good conversation about the magic of the name, nomen est numen est omen, that the name itself is some kind of a indicator of the essential qualities of that which is named, whether or not intentional by the namer. And I definitely can vibe with that. I mean, I've got a name that has quite an interesting set of definitions myself. Then there was this topic of monadic phagocitation and the River Lethe, the forgetting that occurs after one dies, the forgetting of the life that they had before. And we got to talk more about monadic phagocitation, and I'll get to that too. We also discussed Eonic encounters in the astral planes, or Eonic, I guess. So that would be, you know, the meeting of non-corporeal, non-physical entities when doing these type of traveling. So that's always a very fun conversation. Then I asked David about some good starting points for self-initiation practices, and he gave us a few pointers there. So, you know, what I like most of this subject is how it really resonates with the idea of shamanism, like when we talked to Matthew Wood a while back. and how we get our initiations through our dream self, that there's something that goes on during dreams that teaches us things that we wouldn't have had the opportunity to learn in the physical waking world. And after I talked to David, I was really pondering about this idea of forgetting between lives, especially because for the Baron, when he's presented with what seemed to be the most prominent or important past life that he believed he had, I think, told by others that he had this past life. Maybe he investigated himself after this, but he gets this idea that there was a particular life that his transgressions within built up a serious karmic debt for him. And that the only way that he could see to clear this debt was to actually go not necessarily into debt, but basically lose all of his fortune or a large amount of his wealth in this life. And that seems so harsh, right? And I see this kind of thing happening a lot with people's past lives. Someone will come to me for a tuning and they'll tell me this past life that they've been told they had, or that they perceive that they've had. And these various problems stemming from the past life. And I don't know if that kind of baggage is helpful or healthy. I personally tend to think we can address all of our karmic issues within the context of the life we're in. That doesn't mean I don't respect somebody's idea of a past life or lives when they come to me for a session. We're still able to work with that symbolically. To the biofield, it doesn't necessarily matter if a memory or a belief is of something that truly even happened for it to have an effect on someone's energy flow. The belief itself is what directs the energy flow. So, the language of it, really. So in that sense, it's completely valid. But the question is, do we need to take that on in the first place? And is it really so bad that we forget between lives, assuming that we do have multiple incarnations or lives and they work in that kind of a linear fashion in the first place, which I'm not fully convinced about. So I'm pondering this and then kind of asking for guidance about it, especially with it in the forefront of my mind that maybe that would come through a dream. And the night after I had this conversation with David, so I had the conversation, went on with the rest of the day, went to bed. I had this dream where I had died. Like I was my current self and I had died. And I was reborn to a family that knew my current family. And as a baby, I remembered the life that I left, being me, Chance. I remember as this baby meeting my wife and my daughter, like my mom and my dad, my sister, my nephew. And there was just this powerful emotion of sadness and regret that I had left behind the life in an unfinished state, and that my family was still here, but like out of my reach because I was no longer me. And when I woke up from this dream, I was in tears, man. And I don't know that in my entire life, I don't think I've ever woke up from a dream that put me to tears. But my wife will tell you, she was witness to it. I woke up and I was tore up, man. It was. Whew. So I took that as a really powerful message from whatever part of ourself teaches us when we're in dreams about that very question of why we don't remember our past lives. And I felt that the dream was there to show me the very good reason that we don't remember, because it's too painful. It was way too painful. So, take that for what you will, but it was, to me, very, very potent, like dream initiation, you could call it. And then this other subject that I mentioned in the plus extension, monadic phagocitation. This is about the doctrine that those of us who leave this life without reaching a certain level of like coherence, or I guess coherence is probably the right word, that we can retain who we are after we leave our body, the development of the energy body, you could say, or the light body. I may not be getting this exactly right, but the doctrine of monadic phagocytation says that the source, the monad, the world soul, the big omni all-encompassing soul that all the other little souls come out of, that it actually eats phagocitation. It consumes the light bodies of people that are not coherent enough to, I don't know, resist or to remain individuated. It consumes them after they die, which is basically like, I don't want to call it an oblivion, but it's essentially like a recycling of their soul. And that one, that belief, I don't know how that hits for me either. I'm not saying it's wrong. And when I talked to David about it, I kind of couched my questioning in the terms of the pop culture sort of Gnosticism that might suggest that the world is some kind of a energy harvesting farm or prison planet, you could say. And that I wondered if this doctrine had anything to do with that sort of twisted Gnosticism, that the belief, asking if the belief had anything to do with some notion that we're actually here to be kept lowered, but, like livestock, not up to our full potential for that consumption by some being that engineered it for that purpose. And I was happy that his response was like, no, definitely not. That is not what it's about. So maybe I'm not fully comprehending the Hermeticists of the 20th century's belief around monadic phagocitation, but it does kind of sound like that. So, take that what you will, and definitely get into the plus extension if you are curious to hear David talk about that from a more learned perspective, because it was my first time hearing that particular terminology. It's fun to say, though. Phagocitation. So if you want to get in the plus extension, probably should have already said this, but the drill. Patreon, Innerverse on Patreon, patreon.com/Innerverse, or my YouTube channel membership is going to have this one. I've come to some realizations about Rockfin, that how they've treated some friends of mine that are content creators, and just like the overall usefulness of the site in general, that I'm not going to be posting anything new there anymore. So if you guys have Rockfin memberships and you've been using that to get Innerverse Plus, you already weren't getting Inner World, because I already wasn't putting that there, because I think that you need to support Dylan or me directly to get that stuff, because it's so good. But from now on, I'm just going to leave it. So if, the old stuff, there's lots of old stuff on there. If you're using Rockfin, that's great, but we're not going to put anything new on there. I might pivot to Substack, so watch out for that. Just got to find the time to build that out. Oh, and another thing that was really cool that felt like similar to the dream initiation that I received after talking to David was the next day. So the morning I wake up from this dream, later that day, I go to visit my mom and dad's place so they can hang out with their granddaughter. And there's a nursery, like a baby room. It was my little sister's room when she was a kid. And I was in there, I don't know, to change a diaper or something. And I noticed that in the corner of the room, kind of concealed behind some furniture, there was a stack of books. And me, I'm like, oh, stack of books. What's this? And on the top of this stack of books was this book of poetry, which I regretfully didn't even get the title of. So I can't even tell you who the author of this poem is. So there's that. But I'm going to read this poem because I picked up the book and I just opened to a random page. The first page I opened to of the whole book. And the poem was called A Chance for the Soul. And I was like, all right, I'm getting the wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I'm going to read this. So I took a picture of the poem. I'm going to read it to you guys because I thought it was so good. And it was so reflective of like my whole mission of what kind of inspiration I want to lead people to through my work. So here it is, A Chance for the Soul. Am I leading the life that my soul, mortal or not, wants me to lead? Is a question that seems at least as meaningful as the question, am I leading the life I want to live? Given the vagueness of the pronoun I, the number of things it wants at any moment, fictive or not, the soul asks for a few things only, if not just one. So life would be clearer if it weren't so silent, inaudible. Even here in the yard an hour past sundown when the pair of cardinals and crowd of starlings have settled down for the night in the poplars. Have I planted the seed of my talent in fertile soil? Have I watered and trimmed the sapling? Do birds nest in my canopy? Do I throw a shade others might find inviting? These are some handy metaphors the soul is free to use if it finds itself unwilling to speak directly for reasons beyond me, assuming it's eager to be of service. Now the moon, rising above the branches, offers itself to my soul as a double. Its scarred face, an image of the disappointment I'm ready to say I've caused if the soul names the particulars and suggests amendments. So fine are the threads that the moon uses to tug at the ocean that Galileo himself couldn't imagine them. He tried to explain the tides by the Earth's momentum as yesterday. I tried to explain my early waking, 3 hours before dawn, by street noise. Now I'm ready to posit a tug or nudge from the soul. Some insight too important to be put off till morning might have been mine if I'd opened myself to the occasion as I do now. Here's a chance for the soul to fit its truth to a world of yards, moons, poplars, and starlings, to resist the fear that to talk my language means to be shoehorned into my perspective till it thinks as I do, narrowly. Be brave, soul, I want to say to encourage it. Your student, however slow, is willing, the only student you'll ever have. So that's pretty good, right? It's like asking the exact question that I was asking the night before in a way like, hey, can you talk to me, soul? Can you give me a nudge in the direction that I'm asking about? And not to mention the entire thread about like, is this the life I want to live? I can gratefully say that it is, but the entire impetus for me starting this podcast was the fact that I wasn't leading the life I wanted to live, and I was trying to figure out how. Asking most of the guests I had on some version of the question, like, how are you doing this? How are you living the life your soul intends, and you're not afraid of not having enough money or it not working out because you don't have a regular income source? And the answer that no one could really quite tell me until I did it myself is that it's a leap of faith. And, you've probably heard me talk about this before, but if you're on the precipice, if you're feeling those nudges, if you're waking up early, 3 hours before dawn, and you're wondering about, is this because I'm uncomfortable in my soul? Because in 4 hours, I've got to go to this job I hate. Yeah, the answer is yes. And in whatever way you can take a step towards the leap of faith, if you're not ready or quite to the cliff's edge, take a step every day or every week or however possible, right? And another thing about this talk with David was I enjoyed getting to discuss some biofield tuning stuff in the first hour. Those sessions are going incredibly well. I've been a little long in the outro, so I won't go on and on about it, but if you're curious about what kind of information your soul, which I think your biofield or your light body, your energy field is the same thing as the soul. It's the light in your eyes that people see leave whenever somebody's passed away. If you're curious what kind of nudging might be available to you, biofield tuning is a good way to interrogate that light body and find out the nudging that is necessary to get a better relationship with your soul. I know that seems like a big claim, but it's absolutely a true one. So innerversepodcast.com/sound-healing. And we'll be done with this episode. Great episode. I appreciate David coming on. Even if I didn't fully comprehend or vibe with the Baron himself, the biography about him was absolutely illuminating and valuable. And I thought talking to David was even better than reading the book. So I'm very grateful I was able to have that conversation. And I'll catch you guys all later. Much love.